April 7th, 1945. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Captain Minoru Genda stood before the salvaged equipment his technical team had extracted from Okinawa 3 weeks earlier. The metal chassis, scorched but intact, bore American markings he could now read fluently after years of intelligence work, SCR-584. Through the broken windows of the headquarters building, he could see smoke rising from the previous night's B-29 raid. The Americans came every night now, and Japanese defenses seemed increasingly powerless to stop them. Yet here, on the examination table before him, lay physical evidence that the technological gap was even more catastrophic than the burning cities suggested. The device weighed approximately 200 pounds, compact for radar equipment. Its rotating antenna assembly, though damaged in the crash, revealed engineering sophistication that made Genda's hands tremble slightly as he documented its components. This automatic tracking radar, recovered from a shot-down American aircraft near Kadena Airfield on March 19th, represented technology Japanese engineers had theorized about, but dismissed as impractical for shipboard deployment. It was elegant, deadly, and utterly beyond anything Japan's radar programs had achieved. What Captain Genda did not yet fully comprehend was that this single device explained a mystery that had been devastating Japan's most desperate weapon. The Kamikaze Corps, conceived as Japan's salvation when conventional tactics failed, was being systematically destroyed before pilots could reach their targets. Between October 1944 and April 1945, approximately 2,800 kamikaze aircraft had launched against American naval forces. Fewer than 300 had successfully struck ships. The mathematical reality of this failure rate, 14.5% success against a fleet that should have been overwhelmed by sheer numbers, was being written in electromagnetic wavelengths that Japanese aircraft could not evade and Japanese commanders could not understand. The psychological transformation had already begun among surviving kamikaze pilots. Lieutenant Yasunori Aoki, who had survived 3 aborted kamikaze missions due to mechanical failures each time his unit was decimated before reaching targets, would later tell American interrogators that he knew Japan had lost the war the moment he watched an entire formation of 24 aircraft disappear into clouds of anti-aircraft fire, so dense and accurate it seemed. Impossible. They knew exactly where we were, Aoki said during interrogation at Atsugi Airfield in September 1945. The shells exploded among our aircraft before we emerged from the clouds. Not random firing, not barrage patterns, precise detonations that tracked our movements through weather we believed would conceal us. The kamikaze program that Captain Genda now understood was failing had emerged from a desperation born of accumulated defeat. By October 1944, Japan's conventional naval and air forces had been shattered. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June had destroyed Japan's carrier aviation. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October had broken Japan's surface fleet. American forces were advancing toward the home islands with unstoppable momentum. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, newly appointed commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, proposed what he considered Japan's only remaining option: organized suicide attacks using aircraft as guided missiles. The logic seemed compelling. Conventional bombing and torpedo attacks achieved minimal success against American ships protected by radar-directed fighters and intense anti-aircraft fire. Hit rates for conventional attacks had fallen below 5%. Pilots trained for months only to be shot down before reaching targets. If pilots instead dove their aircraft directly into ships, accepting certain death, success rates should increase dramatically. A pilot willing to die could not be deterred by anti-aircraft fire. He would not break off his attack. He would guide his aircraft into the target with human precision that no mechanical guidance system could match. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The first organized kamikaze attacks launched on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. 24 Mitsubishi, A-6M0 fighters, each carrying a 250-kilogram bomb, targeted American escort carriers of Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3 off Samar. The results initially seemed to validate Onishi's theory. 5 kamikazes struck ships, sinking the escort carrier USS Street Low and damaging 4 others. The exchange ratio appeared favorable. 5 hits from 24 aircraft represented a 21% success rate, far exceeding conventional attack effectiveness. American casualties were significant. Street Low sank within 30 minutes, taking 113 sailors with her. USS Santee suffered 16 killed and 27 wounded. USS Suwannee lost 85 killed and 102 wounded. The psychological impact on American sailors was profound. Men who had survived years of combat found themselves facing enemies who could not be deterred, could not be frightened, could not be convinced to break off attacks. The kamikaze dove through anti-aircraft fire that would have forced any rational pilot to turn away, accepting certain death to deliver their weapon. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Third Fleet, read the battle reports with growing concern. "This is a weapon we cannot counter with conventional defenses," he told his staff aboard USS New Jersey on October 27th. "Pilots who accept death before launching cannot be deterred by the threat of death during attack. We must develop new defensive capabilities, or accept that. Our fleet will be destroyed piecemeal by enemies we cannot stop." The American response came through technology. Japan did not know existed and could not have countered if they had known. Throughout late 1944, American ships began receiving installations of the SCR-584 radar system, originally developed for land-based anti-aircraft batteries, but adapted for naval deployment through engineering modifications that solved the challenges of shipboard operation in corrosive salt environments and unstable platforms subject to wave motion. The SCR-584 represented a quantum leap beyond previous radar systems. Earlier models, like the SC and SK air search radars, could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, but provided only approximate bearing and range information. Fire control required human operators to visually acquire targets and manually track them, a process that took precious seconds and resulted in significant inaccuracy when engaging maneuvering aircraft. The SCR-584 operated at 10 cm wavelength, later improved variants operated at 3 cm, using cavity magnetron technology that generated peak power outputs of 250 kilowatts. The system could detect individual aircraft at ranges exceeding 30 miles, automatically lock onto selected targets, and track them continuously, regardless of weather, visibility, or evasive maneuvers. Most revolutionary was the automatic tracking feature. Once locked onto a target, the radar tracked it continuously, feeding precise position, speed, and trajectory data directly to fire control computers that calculated firing solutions and aimed guns automatically. The integration with proximity-fused shells, designated VT for variable time but actually using miniature radar transceivers in each shell that detonated when sensing aircraft proximity, created a defensive system of devastating effectiveness. Guns aimed automatically. Shells exploded automatically when near targets. Human operators merely selected targets and authorized engagement. The system could track and engage multiple targets simultaneously, a capability called automatic fire control that Japan never achieved throughout the war. For kamikaze pilots approaching American task forces, the SCR-584 meant they were being tracked from the moment they came within radar range. As they closed to attack distance, fire control computers calculated their exact position and trajectory. When they entered gun range, shells began exploding around them with uncanny accuracy, detonating not on timer settings, but when proximity fuses sensed aircraft nearby. The pilots had no warning, no indication they were being tracked, no understanding of why anti-aircraft fire seemed impossibly accurate. Lieutenant Junior Grade Kenji Nakagawa, who survived when his aircraft was shot down by American fighters before reaching the task force, later described his shock at watching an entire formation destroyed. "We approached, in a group of 18 aircraft," Nakagawa told interrogators at Yokosuka Naval Base in October 1945. "We maintained formation through clouds that should have concealed us. As we emerged at 8,000 meters, approximately 12 miles from the American carriers, the anti-aircraft fire began immediately. Not searching for fire, not barrage patterns, precise explosions that tracked our formation. Within 2 minutes, 15 aircraft had been shot down. The 3 of us who survived were engaged by fighters and forced down before reaching attack range. We never understood how the Americans knew our exact position while we were still in the clouds. The statistical evidence of SCR-584's effectiveness emerged gradually through analysis of kamikaze operations. In October 1944, before widespread deployment of the new radar, kamikaze success rates achieved 14.3% of aircraft launched successfully struck targets. November saw success rates drop to 11.7% as more ships received SCR-584 installations. December brought further decline to 8.9%. By January 1945, success rates had fallen to 6.2%. February saw 5.1%. March brought catastrophic collapse to 3.8%. The pattern was unmistakable to Japanese naval intelligence officers analyzing mission reports. Something had changed in American defenses between October 1944 and March 1945. Kamikaze pilots reported impossibly accurate anti-aircraft fire. They described shells that exploded near aircraft rather than relying on direct hits. They reported being engaged at ranges where visual acquisition should have been impossible in poor weather. Most disturbing, they reported entire formations being destroyed before reaching attack range, suggesting American forces possessed detection capabilities that penetrated clouds and tracked aircraft continuously. Captain Genda, one of Japan's most experienced naval aviation officers and principal architect of the Pearl Harbor attack plan, had been tasked with analyzing kamikaze effectiveness in February 1945. His assignment came from Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, who needed to understand why Japan's last desperate weapon was failing to achieve results that justified its terrible cost. Genda assembled every available combat report, every pilot debriefing, every photograph and intelligence assessment related to American anti-aircraft defenses. The data painted a disturbing picture. Kamikaze attacks were achieving minimal results at catastrophic cost. Between October 1944 and March 1945, approximately 2,000 aircraft had been expended. Pilot training programs were graduating men with barely 50 hours flight time, sometimes less, because experienced instructors had been killed and fuel shortages. Limited training. These inadequately trained pilots were being sent on one-way missions against defenses that seemed impossibly effective. The mathematics were inescapable. If current trends continued, Japan would exhaust its remaining aircraft and pilots within months, while inflicting insufficient damage to alter American operational timelines. The kamikaze program, conceived as Japan's salvation, was becoming a death spiral that consumed resources without producing strategic results. Genda's preliminary report, submitted to Admiral Toyoda on March 8, 1945, stated with characteristic bluntness, "Kamikaze operations are achieving success rates below 7%, insufficient to justify continued expenditure of aircraft and pilots. American defenses have improved dramatically since October, suggesting new technology or tactics we do not understand. Without knowledge of what has changed, we cannot develop countermeasures. Without countermeasures, kamikaze operations represent the systematic sacrifice of our remaining air assets with negligible strategic impact." Toyoda ordered Genda to determine what had changed in American capabilities. The answer came 11 days later, when Japanese forces recovered wreckage from an American aircraft shot down near Kadena Airfield on Okinawa. The aircraft, a Douglas A-26 Invader, assigned to the 77th Bombardment Squadron, had been attacking Japanese positions when anti-aircraft fire severely damaged it. The pilot attempted to reach American-controlled territory, but crashed approximately 2 miles from Kadena. Japanese soldiers reached the wreckage before American rescue forces, secured the area, and transported salvageable equipment to intelligence units. Among the recovered items was a compact radar unit bearing American designation SCR-584, The device had survived the crash with moderate damage. Enough remained intact for Japanese technicians to understand its basic operating principles and recognize its revolutionary capabilities. Genda received the device on March 23 at Tokyo headquarters. His technical team, consisting of radar specialists from the Naval Technical Research Institute and experienced signals intelligence officers, began examination immediately. What they discovered over the following 2 weeks confirmed Genda's worst suspicions and explained the catastrophic failure of kamikaze operations. The SCR-584 operated on principles Japanese radar development had explored theoretically but abandoned as impractical. The use of centimetric wavelengths, 10 centimeters initially and 3 centimeters in improved variants, provided resolution and accuracy impossible with longer wavelength systems. Japanese radar research had focused primarily on meter wavelength systems, considered more reliable and easier to manufacture with available technology. The decision to pursue meter wavelength rather than centimetric development was now revealed as strategically catastrophic. More devastating was the automatic tracking capability. Japanese radar systems required human operators to manually track targets, a process vulnerable to operator error and limited to tracking single targets effectively. The SCR-584 locked onto targets automatically and tracked them continuously with mechanical precision, feeding data directly to fire control computers. A single installation could track multiple targets simultaneously, allocating gun batteries automatically and engaging threats without human intervention beyond target selection. Commander Takeo Shibata, chief radar engineer at the Naval Technical Research Institute and a specialist in microwave systems, examined the magnetron assembly extracted from the damaged radar. What he found shocked him. This cavity magnetron generates 250 kilowatts peak power at 10 centimeter wavelength, Shibata wrote in his technical analysis dated April 2, 1945. Our most advanced magnetron prototypes achieve 15 kilowatts at similar wavelengths. The Americans have not merely incremental advantages in radar technology, they possess capabilities an entire generation beyond our current systems. More critically, this device shows production quality indicating established manufacturing processes. This is not experimental technology. This is operational equipment deployed across their fleet. The implications cascaded through Genda's analysis like falling dominoes. If American ships possessed automatic tracking radar operating at centimetric wavelengths with resolution measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters, then every assumption underlying kamikaze tactics was invalid. Clouds provided no concealment from radar that penetrated weather. Low-level approaches were detected as easily as high-altitude approaches. Evasive maneuvers were tracked continuously. The human guidance that made kamikaze attacks theoretically superior to conventional attacks was rendered irrelevant by automatic systems that engaged aircraft before pilots could position for terminal dives. Worse yet, the integration with proximity-fused shells meant American anti-aircraft guns no longer needed direct hits. Shells exploded automatically when near aircraft, creating lethal fragmentation patterns that destroyed or damaged aircraft passing within 30 meters. The combination of automatic tracking radar and proximity-fused ammunition created a defensive bubble around American ships that kamikaze aircraft could not penetrate in sufficient numbers to overwhelm defenses. Genda compiled his findings into a classified report submitted to Admiral Toyoda on April 9, 1945, 2 days after the massive kamikaze operation against American forces off Okinawa that would be designated Kikusui No. 1. The timing was grimly appropriate. Kikusui 1 had launched 355 kamikaze aircraft and 341 conventional attack aircraft in the largest concentrated air assault of the war. American forces reported 24 kamikaze hits on ships, sinking 3 destroyers and 1 LST while damaging 13 other vessels. The exchange ratio was catastrophic. 24 successful strikes from 355 kamikaze aircraft represented a 6.8% success rate, consuming aircraft and pilots at unsustainable rates for minimal strategic impact. "We must report with complete frankness," Genda wrote in the opening paragraph of his assessment, "that American radar technology has rendered kamikaze tactics obsolete. The automatic tracking radar recovered from Kadena demonstrates capabilities against which we have no countermeasures and no defenses. American ships can detect our aircraft at ranges exceeding 30 miles regardless of weather. They track formations continuously through clouds. They engage with accuracy that suggests automated fire control systems. Most critically, they appear to use proximity-fused ammunition that detonates near aircraft rather than requiring direct hits." The report detailed technical specifications of the SCR-584, explained its operational advantages, and provided statistical analysis of declining kamikaze effectiveness correlated with American radar deployment. The conclusions were devastating. Kamikaze operations cannot achieve success rates sufficient to alter American operational capabilities. Current trends suggest complete exhaustion of aircraft and trained pilots by June 1945, with negligible strategic impact. Continuation of current tactics represents the systematic sacrifice of our remaining assets without compensating benefit. Genda recommended immediate suspension of large-scale kamikaze operations until countermeasures could be developed. He proposed research into radar-absorbing materials, though acknowledging that Japanese industrial capacity could not produce such materials in operationally significant quantities. He suggested tactical modifications, including approaches at extremely low altitude, where radar detection might be degraded by sea return, though noting that proximity-fused shells remained effective regardless of approach profile. Most honestly, he acknowledged that no tactical or technical solutions existed within Japan's capabilities to overcome American radar superiority. Admiral Toyoda read Genda's report with the stoic acceptance of a commander who had long suspected the truth, but hoped desperately to be wrong. The combined fleet, once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, now consisted primarily of ships too damaged for operation or too precious to risk in combat. Naval aviation had been reduced to kamikaze units consuming inadequately trained pilots at rates that would exhaust reserves within months. The strategic situation was hopeless, rendered more hopeless by technological inferiority that could not be overcome through courage or sacrifice. Yet, operations continued because surrender was politically impossible and strategically unthinkable. Kikusui No. 2 launched on April 12th, Kikusui No. 3 on April 16th, additional waves following through May and June. Each operation consumed hundreds of aircraft. Each achieved success rates below 10%. Each proved Genda's analysis correct, while Japanese leadership pursued tactics that no longer worked against enemies possessing decisive technological advantages. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The psychological impact on surviving kamikaze pilots was profound. These men had volunteered for certain death, believing their sacrifice would save Japan. They had been told that American defenses could not stop determined pilots willing to die. They had been assured that Divine Wind, Kamikaze, would protect Japan as it had protected Japan from Mongol invasion in the 13th century. Instead, they watched friends and comrades being destroyed before reaching targets, shot down by anti-aircraft fire of impossible accuracy, killed before their sacrifices could achieve anything. Lieutenant Yasunori Aoki, the pilot who survived 3 aborted missions, described the progressive demoralization in his unit. After the first mission, where we lost 18 of 24 aircraft before reaching the American fleet, the surviving pilots understood something had changed. Aoki told interrogators, "We had expected heavy losses. We accepted death. But we expected to reach our targets, to make our deaths meaningful. Instead, we were being killed before we could accomplish anything." The senior pilots who survived spoke privately about American radar, about tracking systems we could not evade. But officially, we were told that greater determination and better tactics would overcome American defenses. We knew this was false. We flew anyway because orders required it, and refusal meant execution. The examination of the SCR-584 continued through April and into May 1945 as Japanese engineers attempted to reverse engineer its components and understand its operational capabilities. What they discovered with each day of analysis deepened their understanding of Japan's technological inferiority and the hopelessness of developing effective countermeasures within any time frame that mattered. Commander Shibata's team disassembled the magnetron assembly with meticulous care, photographing each component and measuring every dimension. The cavity magnetron itself, British in origin but manufactured in American factories by the tens of thousands, consisted of a copper cylinder approximately 10 centimeters in diameter, with 8 precisely machined resonant cavities arranged symmetrically around a central cathode. The entire assembly was surrounded by powerful permanent magnets using cobalt iron alloys. The engineering was extraordinary not for its complexity, but for its elegant simplicity and obvious manufacturability. What strikes us most forcefully, Shibata wrote in his supplementary technical report dated April 27, 1945, is not that Americans have achieved this technology, but that they have clearly produced it in vast quantities. The construction quality, the standardized components, the evidence of machine manufacturing rather than hand assembly, all indicate industrial production measured in thousands or tens of thousands of units. We are not observing experimental technology. We are observing mass-produced equipment deployed across their entire fleet. The industrial implications are more devastating than the technical specifications. Japanese radar engineers had been working on centimetric radar development since 1942, but progress had been limited by material shortages, competing priorities, and fundamental gaps in understanding of microwave physics. Several experimental magnetrons had been built at the Naval Technical Research Institute and at universities including Tokyo Imperial University and Osaka Imperial University. Peak power outputs achieved by these experimental units ranged from 5 to 15 kilowatts, barely 6% of the SCR-584's 250 kilowatt output. More critically, these were laboratory prototypes. None had been adapted for operational deployment. The automatic tracking mechanism recovered from the SCR-584 revealed equally sophisticated engineering. The system used servo motors to continuously adjust antenna position, maintaining lock-on targets through sophisticated feedback circuits. Range and bearing data were extracted electronically and transmitted to fire control computers via synchro transmission systems. Everything was automated. Everything was continuous. Everything worked with mechanical precision that eliminated human error and reaction time delays. Japanese fire control systems relied heavily on human operators. Range estimation was performed optically using stereoscopic rangefinders. Bearing was determined visually. Target motion analysis required manual plotting and calculation. Fire control directors transmitted data to gun mounts through mechanical systems or simple electrical connections. The process worked adequately when engaging targets visible to human observers under good conditions. Against aircraft maneuvering through clouds or approaching at low altitude, human operators struggled to maintain accuracy. The Americans had eliminated human limitations through automation. Radar tracked targets continuously, regardless of visibility. Computers calculated firing solutions instantly. Servo systems aimed guns automatically. Proximity fuses eliminated the need for precise range settings, detonating shells automatically when aircraft passed nearby. The entire defensive system operated with superhuman speed and accuracy, creating barriers of exploding. Shells that kamikaze aircraft could not penetrate in sufficient numbers. Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe, intelligence officer, assigned to analyze American anti-aircraft capabilities, compiled reports from surviving kamikaze pilots and escort fighter pilots who had observed American defenses. The consistency of these reports was striking and disturbing. Pilots describe anti-aircraft fire that begins at extreme range, continues with impossible accuracy as they approach, and intensifies to levels that make successful attack nearly impossible, Abe wrote in his May 5th assessment. They report shells that explode near aircraft rather than requiring direct hits. They describe being engaged through clouds, where visual acquisition should be impossible. They report formations being destroyed systematically, aircraft after aircraft shot down in rapid succession. The tactical implications were catastrophic. Kamikaze tactics assumed that determined pilots would accept losses during approach and press attacks home regardless of defensive fire. The calculations had suggested that if 10 aircraft attacked simultaneously, American defenses might destroy 6 or 7, but 3 or 4 would penetrate to strike targets. With automatic tracking radar and proximity fuses, American defenses were destroying 9 of 10 attacking aircraft before they could reach terminal attack positions. The mathematics that had justified kamikaze operations no longer held. Captain Genda spent weeks analyzing whether tactical modifications could improve success rates sufficiently to justify continued operations. Every option he examined revealed fundamental problems that technology could not overcome. High-altitude approaches allowed early detection and provided more time for defenses to engage. American radar tracked aircraft continuously from ranges exceeding 30 miles. Combat air patrols, guided by radar controllers, intercepted formations before they reached anti-aircraft gun range. The high-altitude approach that had worked in October 1944 was obsolete by March 1945. Low-altitude approaches, flying just above wavetops to minimize radar detection time, seemed theoretically promising. Radar performance degraded near the surface due to sea return. The radar echoes reflected from waves that cluttered displays and masked low-flying aircraft. However, American radar technology had advanced beyond Japanese understanding. The SCR-584 used sophisticated signal processing and narrow beam widths that minimized sea return problems. More critically, even if aircraft approached successfully at low altitude, they still had to climb to attack positions, exposing themselves to anti-aircraft fire during the most vulnerable phase of attack when they were close to targets and maneuvering to dive. Coordinated mass attacks, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers, required more aircraft than Japan could commit to individual operations. The Kikusui operations launched hundreds of aircraft simultaneously, yet success rates remained below 10%. American task forces contained dozens of ships, each with multiple radar-directed gun mounts. Proximity-fused shells created overlapping fields of fire. Combat air patrols intercepted formations before they reached gun range. The defensive system had sufficient capacity to engage every attacking aircraft multiple times before it could reach terminal dive position. Night attacks avoided visual detection and degraded fighter interception capabilities, but radar negated the advantages of darkness. SCR-584 tracked aircraft as effectively at midnight as at noon. Proximity fuses detonated without requiring visual acquisition. American ships operated night fighter patrols guided by radar controllers. The darkness that should have concealed approaching aircraft provided no protection against electromagnetic detection that saw through darkness as if it were transparent. Approaches, using clouds and rain to conceal approach routes, had initially shown promise. Early kamikaze operations achieved some success, approaching through weather that degraded American radar performance and prevented fighter interception. By March 1945, improved American radar and all-weather fighters had eliminated this advantage. The SCR-584 tracked aircraft continuously through weather that completely obscured visual detection. All-weather night fighters, initially equipped with older radar but progressively upgraded with improved systems, intercepted formations in conditions where Japanese pilots could barely maintain formation. Every tactical option Genda examined was countered by American technology. The examination revealed a fundamental truth he had suspected but hoped was incorrect. Technology had rendered tactics irrelevant. No tactical approach, no amount of courage, no willingness to sacrifice could overcome the electromagnetic advantage American forces possessed. Japanese pilots were being killed by systems they could not see, tracked by radar they could not detect, engaged by guns they could not evade, destroyed by shells that did not require direct hits. Genda's supplementary report, submitted to Admiral Toyoda on May 15, 1945, stated conclusions that effectively condemned kamikaze operations as strategically futile. All tactical modifications examined offer negligible improvement in success rates. American radar technology detects aircraft regardless of approach altitude, weather conditions, or time of day. Automatic tracking systems engage aircraft continuously from detection to destruction. Proximity-fused ammunition eliminates the accuracy requirements that previously allowed some aircraft to penetrate defenses. Without technology to counter American radar, without capability to jam or deceive their tracking systems, without means to destroy their ships from beyond gun range, kamikaze operations cannot achieve success rates sufficient to justify continued expenditure of aircraft and pilots. The report recommended immediate termination of large-scale kamikaze operations and reallocation of remaining aircraft to homeland. Defense against expected American invasion. Genda acknowledged that this recommendation would be politically unacceptable, but argued that continuing current operations represented the purposeless sacrifice of Japan's last military assets. "We are killing our remaining pilots without accomplishing strategic objectives," he wrote. "This is not an honorable sacrifice. This is a waste." Admiral Toyoda read Genda's assessment and filed it with other reports documenting Japan's deteriorating military position. Operations would continue not because they were effective, but because alternatives were politically impossible. The government could not acknowledge that kamikaze operations, proclaimed as Japan's salvation and celebrated in propaganda as proof of Japanese spiritual superiority over materialistic Americans, were actually achieving nothing except the systematic death of young men. The broader understanding of American technological superiority spread through Japanese naval aviation as survivors shared experiences and officers briefed units on intelligence findings. By May 1945, most experienced pilots understood that kamikaze operations were failing. Junior pilots, many with barely 50 hours total flight time, often did not understand until their final missions when they watched comrades being destroyed before reaching targets. Ensign Teruo Yamaguchi, who survived when his aircraft's engine failed during takeoff for a kamikaze mission on May 11th, later described the briefing his unit received before the operation. "We were told that American radar could detect us, but that determination and proper tactics would allow us to penetrate their defenses," Yamaguchi told interrogators at Kanoya Air Base in September 1945. The senior pilots knew this was false. They had seen earlier missions destroyed, but they said nothing because speaking truthfully would be considered defeatism and they would be executed. So we were sent to die, knowing that our leaders understood we would accomplish nothing but hoped we would kill some Americans before being killed ourselves. It was not an honorable death. It was murder disguised as a military operation. The statistical summary of kamikaze operations confirmed the technological revolution's decisive impact. Between October 1944 and August 1945, approximately 2,800 kamikaze aircraft launched against American naval forces during organized operations, with additional hundreds employed in individual attacks. Of these, approximately 290 to 300 strikes were confirmed, representing success rates between 10.4 and 10.7% overall. The monthly breakdown revealed the progressive deterioration as American radar deployment expanded. October 1944 saw 14.3% success rate with limited radar-equipped ships. November dropped to 11.7%. December fell to 8.9%. January 1945 brought 6.2%. February saw 5.1%. March collapsed to 3.8%. April recovered slightly to 7.1% due to overwhelming numbers in Kikusui operations that temporarily saturated defenses. May fell to 4.3%. June saw 3.9%. July and August combined managed only 2.8% as Japan's air forces neared complete exhaustion. The correlation between declining success rates and expanding American radar deployment was mathematically undeniable. Intelligence assessments indicated that approximately 30% of American ships possessed SCR-584 or equivalent systems in October 1944. By January 1945, coverage exceeded 60%. By April, virtually all major combatants and most smaller vessels had received installations. The defensive umbrella expanded until kamikaze aircraft faced radar-directed fire from the moment they approached task forces until they were destroyed. American casualties from kamikaze attacks, while significant, were insufficient to alter operational plans or timelines. Approximately 47 ships were sunk by kamikaze attacks, mostly smaller vessels, including destroyers, destroyer escorts, and amphibious craft. Approximately 300 ships were damaged, many seriously, requiring months of repair work. American casualties totaled approximately 4,700 killed and equal numbers wounded from all kamikaze attacks throughout the war. These losses, while tragic for the individuals and families affected, represented manageable attrition for forces whose industrial base produced ships faster than Japan could sink them, and whose personnel system replaced casualties faster than combat could inflict them. Japan sacrificed approximately 3,800 pilots in kamikaze operations, along with equivalent numbers of aircrew in conventional attacks supporting kamikaze missions. These men were irreplaceable. Japan's training programs could not produce qualified pilots fast enough to replace losses. Each kamikaze mission consumed pilots who had taken months to train, who represented scarce resources Japan could not afford to waste. The exchange ratio was catastrophically unfavorable. Japan lost approximately 13 pilots for each American ship sunk, approximately 1 pilot for every 3 Americans killed. This was strategic suicide, the systematic destruction of Japan's last mobile reserves. The human cost extended beyond the pilots themselves. Each kamikaze pilot left family who mourned him, communities that had celebrated his departure and now grieved his death. The social impact of losing thousands of young men, many barely old enough to vote in the civilian government they were dying to protect, rippled through Japanese society. By summer 1945, few families remained untouched by military casualties. The propaganda that had celebrated kamikaze as proof of Japanese superiority rang hollow in communities burying their sons. Lieutenant Ichiro Fujita, operations officer at Kanoya Air Base in Kyushu, one of the primary kamikaze launching points, maintained detailed records of departing pilots and their fates. His diary, recovered after Japan's surrender and later published with his family's permission, revealed the progressive psychological deterioration among base personnel as they witnessed mission after mission achieving nothing. May 24, 1945. Dispatched 32 aircraft this morning for attacks on American carriers off Okinawa. Monitored radio communications until aircraft entered the combat area. Heard requests for fighter support, reports of intense anti-aircraft fire, desperate calls as aircraft were shot down. 18 pilots reported being destroyed before reaching attack positions. 7 more were lost to fighters. 4 reported attacking but observed results were unclear. 3 aircraft returned with mechanical problems. Pilots devastated at surviving when comrades died. Success rate approximately 12.5%, consistent with recent operations. The mathematics are inescapable. We are killing our pilots without accomplishing strategic objectives. Everyone here understands this. No one speaks it aloud because speaking truth is considered defeatism. So we continue operations that achieve nothing except death. The recovery and examination of the SCR-584 from Okinawa provided technical confirmation of what operational results had already suggested. American radar technology had created defensive capabilities against which Japan had no effective countermeasures. Captain Genda's team at Naval Technical Research Institute attempted to develop radar warning receivers that could detect SCR-584 emissions, providing pilots at least with awareness they were being tracked. The technical challenges proved insurmountable within available time and resources. The SCR-584 operated at 10 cm wavelength, later improved to 3 cm. Japanese radar warning receivers, designed to detect longer wavelength systems, were deaf to these frequencies. Developing new receivers required vacuum tubes capable of operating at microwave frequencies, sophisticated antenna designs, and sensitive detector circuits. Japanese electronics industry could theoretically build such devices, but production capacity was overwhelmed by competing priorities and material shortages made worse by American submarine warfare that had destroyed Japan's merchant fleet. Even if radar warning receivers could be developed and produced, they would only provide awareness of tracking, not protection from it. Pilots, knowing they were tracked, still faced the problem of penetrating defenses guided by that tracking. The fundamental issue remained: American technology allowed detection, tracking, and engagement of aircraft with accuracy and speed that human pilots could not counter through skill or tactics alone. Japanese engineers also explored radar-absorbent materials, substances that could coat aircraft and reduce radar returns. The physics were well understood. Certain materials absorbed electromagnetic radiation rather than reflecting it. If aircraft could be coated with such materials, radar detection range might be reduced. However, effective radar-absorbent materials required precise thickness matched to the radar wavelength being countered. Materials effective against 10 cm radar would be ineffective against 3 cm systems. Worse, the materials required specialized production capabilities Japan lacked and added weight that degraded. Aircraft performance. Experimental coatings were developed and tested on captured American aircraft at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in June 1945. The results showed modest reductions in radar return, perhaps 20 to 30% at best, insufficient to significantly reduce detection range. An aircraft detectable at 30 miles might become detectable at 25 miles when coated with absorbent material. This provided negligible tactical advantage while adding manufacturing complexity and weight penalties Japan's struggling aviation industry could not accommodate. The most promising countermeasure Japanese engineers identified was electronic jamming, transmitting powerful radio signals at frequencies used by American radar to mask aircraft returns or deceive tracking systems. The theory was sound. Sufficient jamming power could overwhelm radar receivers, masking targets, or creating false echoes that confused automatic tracking. However, effective jamming required knowing exactly what frequencies to jam, generating sufficient power to overwhelm receivers at tactical ranges, and deploying jamming equipment that did not weigh so much that aircraft performance suffered critically. Japan lacked detailed knowledge of American radar operating frequencies beyond what could be determined from examination of the single SCR-584 unit. Effective jamming required knowing frequencies used by multiple radar types across the entire American fleet. Jamming equipment capable of generating sufficient power weighed hundreds of pounds, more than most kamikaze aircraft could carry, while maintaining fuel loads necessary to reach targets. Most critically, developing and producing effective jamming systems required months Japan did not have, as the war approached its inevitable conclusion. By June 1945, when Captain Genda's team completed their examination of captured American radar technology, the strategic situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. Okinawa had fallen to American forces after 3 months of fighting that cost Japan its last significant air reserves. The Kikusui operations had consumed over 1,500 aircraft, achieving negligible strategic impact. American forces were preparing for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan's home islands, scheduled to begin with Operation Olympic against Kyushu in November 1945. Japanese military leadership understood that homeland defense would require every available aircraft and pilot. The remaining kamikaze forces, approximately 5,000 aircraft by optimistic estimates, 2,000 by more realistic assessments, were being reserved for operations against the expected invasion fleets. The belief, maintained despite all evidence to contrary, was that American invasion forces approaching Japanese shores would be vulnerable to mass kamikaze attacks that would inflict casualties sufficient to force negotiated peace terms favorable to Japan. This belief rested on assumptions that operational experience had proven false. It assumed that proximity to Japanese airfields would allow overwhelming numbers of aircraft to attack simultaneously, saturating American defenses. It ignored that American radar would detect massing aircraft long before launch, allowing preemptive strikes on airfields. It assumed that attacking invasion forces would be more vulnerable than task forces that had been operating off Okinawa for months. It ignored that invasion forces would certainly possess the same radar-directed defenses that had decimated kamikaze forces throughout 1945. Most fundamentally, the belief in homeland defense by kamikaze attack ignored the technological reality Captain Genda's examination had revealed. American radar technology had rendered kamikaze tactics obsolete. No amount of determination, no willing acceptance of death, no tactical modifications could overcome the electromagnetic advantage American forces possessed. Japanese pilots would die in their thousands attempting to stop the American invasion. They would accomplish nothing except delaying the inevitable while adding to Japan's casualty totals. The examination of the SCR-584 revealed to Japanese technical specialists and intelligence officers what American industrial and technological superiority meant in practical operational terms. It meant detection capabilities that saw through darkness and weather. It meant tracking systems that followed aircraft with mechanical precision. It meant fire control that aimed guns automatically and engaged targets without human limitations. It meant proximity fuses that eliminated the need for direct hits. It meant defensive systems of such effectiveness that Japanese attack tactics could not achieve success rates sufficient to justify their continued employment. Commander Shibata, who had led the technical examination, wrote a personal assessment dated June 18, 1945, that was never officially submitted, but was found among his papers after the war. We are being defeated not by American courage or American determination, though they possess both in abundance. We are being defeated by American technology and American industrial capacity. The SCR-584 represents capabilities we cannot match with our current scientific understanding and industrial base. Even if we possessed equivalent knowledge, we lack the industrial capacity to produce such systems in significant quantities. The Americans manufacture thousands of these radar units while we struggle to produce dozens of inferior systems. This is not a temporary disadvantage. This is fundamental inferiority that cannot be overcome through sacrifice or determination. Shibata's private assessment echoed conclusions reached independently by Japanese engineers, intelligence officers, and experienced combat commanders throughout the Naval Aviation Service. The war was lost. Technology had decided the outcome as decisively as any battle. American electromagnetic dominance, manifested in radar systems like the SCR-584, had created operational advantages that Japanese forces could neither counter nor overcome. Every kamikaze pilot sent to attack American forces was being sent to certain death with near certainty of accomplishing nothing except adding to casualty statistics. Yet operations continued through July and into August 1945 because acknowledging defeat remained politically impossible. The government could not tell the Japanese people that their sons and brothers were dying pointlessly. The military could not admit that kamikaze operations, celebrated in propaganda as proof of Japanese superiority, were achieving nothing. Senior officers who understood the truth continued ordering missions because alternatives were unavailable and surrender was unthinkable. The end came not through operational defeat, but through strategic shock that made continued resistance impossible. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9, combined with Soviet declaration of war on August 8, shattered the government's last hopes for negotiated peace terms. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast that most Japanese citizens heard for the first time. For kamikaze pilots awaiting orders to attack American invasion forces, surrender came as profound psychological relief, mixed with confusion about meaning and purpose. They had accepted death, believing their sacrifice would save Japan. Now Japan surrendered unconditionally, making their comrades' deaths seemingly pointless. Lieutenant Yasunori Aoki, the pilot who survived 3 aborted missions, later described the emotional chaos following the surrender announcement. We gathered to hear the Emperor's broadcast on August 15th. His words were difficult to understand because he spoke in formal classical Japanese, but his meaning was clear. Japan surrendered. The war we thought would never end, that would continue until every Japanese died fighting had ended through surrender. Some pilots wept. Others sat in silence. A few spoke of continuing to fight despite surrender orders, but most of us felt overwhelming relief that we would not die tomorrow or the day after, mixed with guilt that we survived when so many friends died. The question haunting everyone was whether their deaths meant anything. If Japan surrendered anyway, what was the purpose of all those kamikaze missions? What did they accomplish except adding to casualty numbers? Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.